Do you realize how unprecedented that is? If yes, then I hope you're at least starting to get the idea of why calling this team overrated is such a travesty. If not, then I hope you're at least aware whenever your parents handle babies, because clearly they've dropped you multiple times. So, it's been over 17 years since Arsenal's legendary 03-04 season, where they finished the entire league campaign without a single defeat. That is not only remarkable, but in the modern era of English football, otherwise unheard of. They should be held in the highest regard, respected, celebrated, looked back with fondness and romance. But are they? Well, it's a mixed bag. And why is that? Well, to put it directly, it's because most Arsenal fans I know are basically the living embodiment of a fucking mosquito bite. Man, they're annoying. But this does not change the fact that calling that legendary side overrated is simply ridiculous. And today, I'm going to take you through 7 reasons why that is. P.S. I'm afraid there's not going to be much rhyming in this one, so if you're starved of any alliterations, just please try and understand that I'm not a puppet or parrot paid to perform for and please puzzle passers in a parade. Period. Anyways, let's roll on. Number 7, if you're judging them on the amount of draws, you're simply not looking deep enough. Starting with what is arguably the most common statistic thrown around in attempts to downplay their extraordinary achievement, the fact that Wenger's men drew 12 out of a possible 38 games that season. But you see, here's the thing. In order to remain undefeated in one of Europe's top leagues, you have to have more than a handful of draws. Don't believe me? Let's take a closer look at the only other 2 teams who managed to go undefeated in one of Europe's top 5 leagues over the last 40 years. And by the way, in one of Europe's top leagues only, because I am not prepared to insult the teams I'm about to mention by putting them on the same bracket as Brendan Rodgers' Celtic, who played at least twice against Inverness Caledonian Thistle. I'm actually scared to say that out too loud in case my laptop starts floating. Or, for that matter, Steaua Bucharest from the late 80s and early 90s, who went 4 out of 6 seasons undefeated in Romania. 4 out of 6 seasons. How is that even possible? Okay, seriously, look. On the one hand, they won the European Cup with practically the same team as season before and reached another final later on. Plus, it's unfair to use the weakness of the opposition against them, as you can only beat what's in front of you. However, on the other giant hand, number 1, the cup win wasn't during an unbeaten season. Number 2, there's no way they could have remained unbeaten and reached a European final in the modern French league, let alone any of the top 5. And number 3, what the f*** is an Argesh Piteshti? Number 4, I'm not including them, you can't make me. So, both of the other 2 teams who have gone undefeated in Europe's top leagues over the last 40 years happen to be from Serie A. More recently, it was the Juventus team of 11-12 under their former player and current Spurs boss Antonio Conte, while exactly 2 decades prior it was the famous AC Milan team run by postman Pat's psychotic grandpa Fabio Capello. Now, while differing heavily in style and aesthetics, both teams actually had alarmingly similar results to Arsenal's Invincibles, but worse. For example, Capello's Milan also racked up 12 draws, but they actually played in a league where there was only 18 teams, thus 4 games less, while Juventus had 15 draws, despite playing in a league where the mid-table was nowhere near as strong as it is in England. Makes you think, doesn't it? Fact is, the amount of draws and narrow wins of the Invincible teams should really be praised instead of used against them at every opportunity. Because you see, the super dominant teams people usually rate above the Invincibles, they could never go a season undefeated. And this is related to the amount of draws. Let me explain. The super dominant teams I'm referring to, while exceptional, they were also a tad one-dimensional. Those teams knew one way, all-conquering, relentless, and possession-based. They don't care who their opponent is, they'll simply play one style, expecting to dominate. And while that is amazing, it would never result in an undefeated season in a league of high quality. Why? Well, firstly, as brilliant as it is to dominate 90% of your games, it eventually does get to you. Second, and most importantly, what if there is a team in the league that worked rigorously to nullify every single threat you have? What if they block every passage of play and simply wait for you to make a mistake? Well, granted, most teams tried to do that, but there were certain sides that were simply tailor-made for these giants whom they frequently struggled against. For example, in the case of Barcelona, the records against Real Sociedad and the local derby of Espanyol, even in the all-time great seasons of 09 and 11, didn't exactly scream best side ever. Hard facts are, as rare as it is for an opposition team to get their tactics spot on against these giants, when they do, Heinkes' Bayern, Enrique's Barcelona, Guardiola's Barcelona, Guardiola's Barcelona, Guardiola's Man City, they simply have no response. And this is what separates the invincible sides from the all-conquering dominant sides. Not just Arsenal, but the two Italian clubs as well. But since this video is about Wenger's men, yes, they dominated. Yes, they were possession-based. But they were not like this every week. They also had that extra quality you downright need in order to achieve invincibility. This team knew how to preserve the energy for bigger games while still getting a result. Now, does that mean squad rotation? Well, yes, but not always. That would be far too costly. Spoilers, we will touch up more on this later. Sometimes you play with the same quality players but accept that it simply won't be your day and still get something out of a game. There are other times where you initially set up the same usual way but then realize it's not working and roll with the punches. And then there are times you may find yourself trailing but maintain total focus. Continue to relentlessly attack. Enter their half. Enter their area. Dive in their box. Score the not really dive. Okay, maybe shit. Oh, come on, everyone has luck. Your precious Barcelona teams wouldn't have won either of the Champions League titles if it wasn't for disgraceful officiating both times. No, I have not let that slide go suck on citric acid. Hey, another alliteration. You see, my point is that all unbeaten teams must know how to master the less spoken about crafts. Now yes, in an ideal world, we'd have an invincible team who also dominate and are relentless for 38 out of 38 games. But boy, I don't think I need to tell you that we are not in an ideal world. In fact, the only team that really had a shot of also going undefeated was Chelsea the very next season. And did they relentlessly attack and dominate every game? Ha 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 ha! Did they fuck? Now in Arsenal's case, it wasn't even the manager who set up in different ways. But you know what he did have? Trust. He trusted his players to adjust and make things right when it wasn't going their way. And that trust, as well as the ability to grind out results, are just two small components of many. Since number 6, they are the most complete team in Premier League history. Of all the 7 entries, I'd say this one is by far the most straightforward. But even so, when you begin to explore the specifics of why them being complete means they cannot be considered overrated, you will hopefully have newfound appreciation. Subscribe! Look, I'm sorry, okay? I've seen pretty much every single YouTuber I've ever watched somehow shoehorn in this subscribe thing. I just didn't know how to do it, I'm new to this. But I do want my numbers to rise up. So please subscribe, or, you know, drop dead. Did you know to score the most goals, you need a formidable attack? Okay, no, you obviously knew that, I hope. But did you know the record for most goals in a season has been broken twice since the Invincibles were around? Similarly, to win the most points, you'll have to be the most consistent. The record for most points in a single Premier League season has also been broken twice since the Invincibles were around. To win the most games, you'll have to be the most dominant. That record has since been broken 3 times and equaled 3 times more. But to go a season undefeated, you need all of the above to a decent standard and more. And only one team ever in English football has had that. Now, does that mean they're the best English team in history? No, there are a few other sides in Premier League history that could be considered stronger, but none, I repeat, none more complete. Now, I've already touched up on the tactical diversity in the previous entry, but that is not where this ends. They were complete in every other department as well. They had players from youth, players they developed, established superstars, young foreigners to bring in bravery in style, old local guys to bring in experience and culture, speed, strength, fitness, flair, and of course, the gift of all gifts, Kolo Toure. And trust me, if they were missing any of those components, they would not have been able to pull off the near impossible feat of going undefeated in a Premier League season. And this is precisely why all the other outstanding records set in the Premier League usually get toppled with relevant frequency. But this hasn't since, and most likely never will. Number 5, their Champions League run was not as bad as you think. The general consensus is that they failed in Europe that season. Now, if by fail you mean they didn't win the Champions League, well, you're right. But believe me, that itself was not far from happening at all. And yes, you best believe we will touch up more on this later. But for now, let's start from the very beginning, as I have been reliably informed by one of my brethren is a very good place to start. How bad was their Champions League run? So, they were drawn in a group alongside Inter Milan, Lokomotiv Moscow and Dynamo Kiev. And after a poor start to the tournament where they lost through and drew one of the first 3 games, including being destroyed 3-0 at Highbury against Inter, whoa, it was bad. They topped the group above Inter as well as Moscow and Kiev. To put things into perspective, this was an Inter team who just finished Serie A above the current champions of Europe, AC Milan. And while Lokomotiv Moscow may not be as big of a name as Inter and Arsenal, for example, many people don't know this, but they bared striking similarities that season to Johan Cruyff's Ajax in the 1970s. Okay, no, okay. Alright, look. Let's get serious. Lokomotiv Moscow's run that season itself is actually pretty underrated, because while they did go out in the last 16, it was only by away goals. And to who? Monaco. The same Monaco who went all the way to the final that year, on the way knocking out the biggest club in the world and then current Spanish champions Real Madrid. And not just any Real Madrid, the original Galacticos of Real Madrid, who themselves up until that point were undefeated in that year's competition, topping their group consisting of eventual winners Porto. In short, Lokomotiv Moscow were a force in that year's competition too. As for the Gunners themselves, they went on to wipe the floor with admittedly a modest opposition in Celta Vigo before sinking in the newly found oil factory from down the road, and oh boy, we will touch up more on this in a lot more detail later. But for now, consider this: finishing top of the group above an Inter Milan side who just finished above current champions of Europe AC Milan in Serie A, and the Lokomotiv Moscow team who only went out on away goals to eventual finalists who in turn knocked out the biggest club in the world. Arsenal really did not do that bad. And you know what? They may not have won it, but at least they were in it. What's that, you ask? To which I reply, number 4, their overall record versus the other top Invincibles is quite revealing. Yes, I know, we touched up on this in the 7th entry. Boy, I've been doing a lot of touching today. What? But that was just covering the league form. It's when you compare the 3 teams' overall seasons against one another, you truly realize just how special the Gunners were. So, how did each of the Invincible teams also fare in cup competitions and, in turn, overall? First, Arsenal. They went out in both domestic cup competitions in semi-final to eventual winners, Middlesbrough 1-0 and 2-1 in each leg respectively, and against Manchester United in the FA Cup semi-final 1-0 again, despite dominating throughout with a weakened side, even hitting the woodwork twice. In similar manner, Milan also bowed out in the semi-final of the domestic cup competition that year with an aggregate score of 1-0, while Juventus actually reached the final of the Coppa Italia in their invincible season, losing 2-0 to Napoli. And since this video is about invincibility, let's talk losses. So, across all competitions, both Milan and Juventus lost a game each. You know how many Arsenal lost? 6. Yet, Arsenal had by far the most impressive season. And how is that? Well, it's because of the small matter that both of the Italian teams had no European football. You heard right. Milan the previous season finished second in Serie A, yes, but this was in an era where only the winners were allowed to enter the European Cup, while Juventus finished so low in the 10-11 season, they barely qualified for the qualification of the fucking Europa League. So, if not the amount of losses, what is a fair statistic that could be used to compare the 3 sides? Is it the amount of wins? No, that would be just as dumb. It's actually win percentage. It's a good indicator of dominance and also, as much as it can, i.e. theoretically, eliminates the factor of the amount of games played. Now, Milan in the 91-92 season were in 2 competitions, playing 42, winning 26, drawing 16 and losing 1. That gives them a win percentage of 61.9%. In a bizarre coincidence, Juventus in 11-12 racked up almost identical statistics. Also in 2 competitions, they played 43, won 27, while also drawing 16 and losing 1, making their win percentage 62.8%, both rounded up to 2 decimal places. Now, let's look at Arsenal. They were in 4 competitions in 03-04, Champions League, Premier League, FA Cup, as well as the FA Cup's ginger stepbrother with identity crisis. In those 4 competitions, Arsenal played 58 times, won 37, drawn 15 and lost 6, and that gives us the winning percentage of 63.8%. Once again rounded up to 2 decimal places. So, despite playing in the same amount of competitions that season as the other 2 sides combined, including the toughest tournament in the world, Wenger's men still racked up a bigger win percentage than both. Genuinely remarkable. Not to mention they did so in the toughest league in the world at the peak of his competition. Wait, what? That's right. Number 3, the mid-table contingent that season were even stronger than you think. Everyone knows the cliche of the Premier League being the toughest league in the world. What people may not know, however, is that this was arguably the most prominent during the 03-04 season. Again, let me explain. Okay, for the sake of ambiguity in where the mid-table starts and ends, we will assess the extended mid-table. So that's from 5th, the spot below the Champions League level sides, and 17th, the spot above the relegation zone. Now, at the end of the 03-04 season, Newcastle United were the team that finished just under the Champions League spots at 5th, while Everton were the team that finished just over the relegation zone at 17th. You know how many points separated them? Well, 17. In context, no season since has featured a gap between 5th and 17th less than 22 points. As far as before that season, there was only one 38-game Premier League season where the gap was smaller between 5th and 17th, and that was 98-99, where 5th placed West Ham was 16 points clear of 17th placed Southampton. And how fierce was the mid-table competition that season, you ask? Well, that was the season Manchester United won the treble, yet only managed 79 points. All Premier League champions since have earned more points than them. This was the treble winners, mind you. Fast forward 5 years in 03-04, the mid-table strength hit another peak. The second place team Chelsea lost 7 games, including to Charlton, Bolton and Villa, while United lost 9, including to Wolves, Fulham and 4-1 to a pre-oil Manchester City. And by the way, that season also holds the record for the largest gap between the amount of defeats for the champions and runners-up, with the Blues 7 losses and Arsenal's no losses. This difference of 7 is out there on its own as the most in Premier League history. Not even the super dominant Premier League teams I've mentioned previously managed to create such a comparative gap. These statistics should not only paint a picture on just how insanely competitive it was that season, even for Premier League standards, but also how astonishing it is that amidst all of that, Arsenal still didn't lose a single game. Seriously, do you realize how unprecedented that is? If yes, then I hope you're at least starting to get the idea of why calling this team overrated is such a travesty. If not, then I hope you're at least aware whenever your parents handle babies, because clearly they've dropped you multiple times. Number 2, the 24th of March to the 9th of April 2004. This. Why does no one talk about this? Arsenal fans, you are the most annoying, irritating, whiny, entitled group of cyber hooligans around, but I barely hear any of you using this as an excuse. Boy, you should. It's legit. From the 24th of March to the 9th of April 2004, Arsenal had 5 games in 15 days. Their opponents? Chelsea, United, Chelsea, Liverpool. In other words, one of the biggest clubs in the world and the now richest club in England twice each, as well as a team just a year away from winning the Champions League. Inside 15 days. And you know what? The fact that they remained unbeaten in the league despite such a cruel schedule is in itself insane. Hell, the 100-point City team actually lost their unbeaten run to Liverpool after 3 games in 8 days, where 10 players played 2 or more times. and their opponents were Bristol and Burnley. Arsenal had to face the champions of England amongst two other teams in the top 4. But boy, that is not my point. Let's take a break from what happened to look at what very easily could have happened. Genuinely, if it wasn't for such a kick in the jingles, both of your dads, I'm sorry, but the baby is your brother's horror of a schedule. This team could have very easily been treble winners on top of Invincibles. Yes, I promise you, I've not lost my mind. Just hear me out. Had the fixtures and dates been different, they could have very easily gotten past a United team in transition, as well as a Chelsea team they had already beaten 3 times that season. But this isn't even the meat of the analysis. Had Arsenal gotten past Chelsea and United, the 3 teams almost certainly to have been in their way on the road to winning the treble were Monaco in the Champions League semi-final, Porto in the Champions League final, and in the FA Cup final, Millwall. That's it. 3 very beatable teams would have stood in the way of Arsenal cementing themselves as possibly the greatest club side of all time. And mustn't we forget what we analysed earlier. Not only would they have been treble winners with a golden Premier League title, but would have achieved this in the toughest league in the world at its peak competitive strength. Now, of course, if ifs and buts were candy and nuts, we'd all be allergic. Look, I don't know how that goes. But the point is, at the end of the day, facts are facts, and fact is they didn't do it. They didn't win the Champions League. They didn't win the FA Cup. So no, they're not the greatest club side in history. But they came closer than you think, closer than anyone ever has, and most likely closer than anyone ever will. Right, finally, here we go. Number 1. The neutralization of momentum. After hearing that title, some of you may roll your eyes and think I'm some sort of wannabe junior physicist, but I want you to do 2 things. Number 1, hear me out. Number 2, suck a dick. In that order. When asked what the defining game was of that season, most point to Arsenal winning the league at White Hart Lane, and to be fair, with good reason. Securing a league title against your city rivals, even at home, isn't easy. Just ask Pep. But travelling down the road and doing so in their backyard? Sensational. But no, there was another game that not only defied footballing logic, but if you ask me, which you always should, took the status of this team from legendary to immortal. Arsenal vs Liverpool, Highbury, Good Friday, 2004. Now, it is widely believed that the 2 worst times to concede in a game is either early in the first few minutes, as it can potentially set the tempo for the rest of the game, or just before half time, as it completely rewrites the manager's team talk. So here's some trivia. Which of those unfortunate times did Arsenal concede against Liverpool that day? Answer? Trick question. It was both. They went down inside 5 minutes from a Sami Hyypiä header, and despite managing to level it sometime later, Michael Owen restored Liverpool's lead in the stroke of half time. Liverpool led 2-1 at the break. Now this is where I want you to stop and put yourself in the shoes of Arsene Wenger and his men. In the last 2 weeks, you've gone from being favourites to win a historic treble to being knocked out of both major cup competitions to fierce rivals. Your only true chance of salvation is a near impossible task of a golden Premier League title. But you find your back against the wall the first game back. Nothing seems to be going and has gone your way for quite a while now. What happens next? Well, usually a bottle job. Because you see, the importance of momentum in football by my estimation is understated to this day. So many clubs over the years have both suffered and benefited from this. We spoke about the Bayern Munich treble winning team of 2013 under Jupp Heynckes as one of the all-time greats. They actually very easily could have done this a year prior, but after a rough patch, they ended up with 3 second place finishes. As far as famous examples of teams who reap the benefits of positive momentum, there are many, but I'll just leave you with one. Leicester City 2016. That is the level of insanity. What? That is the level of insanity the force of momentum is capable in football, and on that day, it was pushing against Wenger's men and pushing harder than ever. But what happened next was honestly special. Despite the damaging 15 days leading up to this horror of a first half, they came back swinging right away. Robert Pires equalised 4 minutes in, and then, in a matter of seconds, cometh the hour, cometh the man. Thierry Henry cements himself not only as a Premier League legend, but possibly as the division's greatest ever player, and in turn ensuring that the names of himself and everyone involved in Arsenal Football Club at the time is never forgotten. Overrated? Not f***ing likely. And that is that. Agree or disagree? Beats indifference. Once again, please share it around as well as like, comment, and yes, subscribe. Till next I'm so lonely. Till next time, you keep rolling.